I always knew marriage would be hard. Everyone tells you that when you stand at the altar, but you don't really understand it until you're in the thick of it, until that honeymoon phase fades and real life starts to kick in. My marriage, it wasn't easy, not by a long shot, and it wasn't one singular thing that made it difficult either. It was a slow accumulation of little cracks forming over time. The exhaustion of raising 4 young kids, the financial strain, the relentless cycle of work, stress, laundry, and never having enough time for each other. Somewhere along the way, the warmth between us had faded, replaced with quiet resentment, frustration, and cold silences. I won't lie, I had thought about leaving before. Not seriously, not in any way that I'd ever act on. But in those moments where the weight of it all felt unbearable, I had imagined what life would be like without the constant tension, without the sharp words, and without the lingering hostility. But then she got sick. The cancer diagnosis hit us like a Mack truck, and suddenly everything else, the anger, the resentment, the frustrations, they all disappeared. But she changed too, and not in the way that I had expected. Instead of softening, instead of taking comfort in what little time she had left, she lashed out. Hard. It was like she had been holding back all these years, and now, knowing she wouldn't have to deal with the long-term consequences, she let it all out. She was cruel, picking fights over nothing, finding ways to cut me down whenever she could. It's something that I didn't understand at first. And then one night, during a bout of tears, she admitted why. She told me she was angry at herself, angry that she had to leave, that she was going to put me in the impossible position of being a single father to 4 kids under the age of 13. She said she felt ashamed, that the grief of knowing she was going to burden me had twisted into something uncontrollable. I believed her, so I gritted my teeth and took it all. Every sharp word, every cold shoulder, every insult, it didn't matter. She was dying, and no matter how much she hurt me, it was nothing compared to what she was going through. And no matter how broken things had become between us, I still loved her. So when it was time, I became her caretaker. I held her through the pain. I made sure she was comfortable, that she had everything she needed. When she lost the strength to walk, I carried her. When she felt ugly and weak, I told her she was beautiful. And when she cried, I wiped her tears away. It was the most exhausting thing that I've ever done. Not just physically, but emotionally. I poured everything I had into those last few months, and by the end of it, I felt like I had aged 10 years. And then, just like that, she was gone. I thought the worst was over. I thought the grief, the emptiness, the struggle of raising 4 kids alone, that would be the hardest part. But I'd come to learn that I was very wrong. In the weeks after the funeral, I found myself going through her things. I wasn't ready to pack everything away, but there were practical matters that needed to be handled. Closing accounts, sorting out finances, just the tedious, soul-sucking details of death that no one really warns you about. I logged onto her computer thinking maybe I'd find some old photos or personal documents that I needed to keep. But instead, I found something much worse. She had a separate email account, one that I didn't know about. I found this odd because she wasn't particularly tech-savvy, and we never had a reason to keep secrets from each other, or at least I thought we didn't. When I clicked on this inbox, I couldn't process what I was looking at first. Emails with multiple lawyers, discussions about divorce, custody arrangements where she planned to make me a weekend dad, plans to throw me out of my own house, even emails about forcing me to pay her legal fees, as she planned to tear my life apart. The kicker, if there were one in this situation, these weren't conversations from when things were at their worst years ago. These were all in the days and weeks leading up to her diagnosis. She was going to leave me. She'd been plotting her escape, planning to take my children away from me, to dismantle everything that we had built together. but cancer came first. And suddenly, I wasn't an estranged husband to be discarded. I was a convenient caretaker. For her, a means to an end. She had used me. I sat there staring at the screen blankly, my hands shaking, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. Everything I had done in those final months, everything I had suffered through, had been for a woman who had already decided to cut me out of her life. A woman who had looked me in the eye and let me believe she regretted her cruelty, when, in reality, she had been actively working to ruin me until the moment cancer took away her ability to do so. I had carried her up the stairs. I had bathed her when she was too weak to do it herself. I had spoon-fed her when she couldn't lift her own hands anymore. And all the while, she had planned to leave me broken, alone, struggling to see my own children while she moved on without me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hate her. But she was gone. There was no confrontation to be had, no resolution to be sought, and no apology that could ever come. I had spent months, years carrying the guilt over our rocky marriage, telling myself that maybe I hadn't done enough, that maybe I should have been a better husband. And now I was left with a truth so bitter that I couldn't even begin to process it. As she had begun to slip away, I had whispered that I loved her. I had spent the aftermath grieving a woman who had secretly been plotting to destroy me. I won't tell my kids, not now, maybe not ever. They've already lost their mother. They don't need to know the truth. That she had planned to rip their father away from them, to make our family unrecognizable. That everything they remember about their home, their childhood, was almost torn apart before fate intervened. Let them keep their memories. Let them believe that she loved me, that we were a family until the very end. I don't get that luxury though. I have to live with the truth. I have to wake up every morning knowing that the woman that I once loved, the woman I cared for in her darkest days, had already decided that I wasn't worth keeping. I worked at a fast food chain in the 90s when I was in high school. When I worked there, they were in the process of phasing out denominational gift certificates. Think $5, $10, $25. The way it worked was if you spent more than half the certificate, they would give you the remainder as cash back. So if you ordered $5.50 worth of food and gave them one of the $10 gift certificates, they'd give you the $4.50 back in cash. My manager was in charge of destroying all the existing certificates as we transitioned to the more traditional credit card-looking gift cards. So my manager said that he had shredded the certificates like he was supposed to. But one night when I was closing, I found 2 full boxes of gift certificates tucked deep in the dry storage room. They were absolutely filled to the brim with these certificates that were supposed to be shredded. So I scooped them up, brought them out to the dumpster in trash bags, and threw them away. After we closed, I came back, did a little dumpster diving, and brought the certificates home with me. I counted them all up. There were $1,025, $1,010, and $505 certificates. None of them had any expiration dates on them. Total haul was $40,000 in fast food certificates. My manager never said a word about these. He couldn't. He had reported them destroyed weeks earlier. Over the next 3 years, my girlfriend and I toured every franchise location in our state, and the next 4 states over, ordering food and getting the change. We never kept track on a spreadsheet or anything, but we got good at knowing what menu items were just about half. After the first year, we started saving the change in a shoebox and let it build up. I bought my very first car for $7,800 cash from the change. And for some reason, a kid's ice cream cone was $1.05 back then. If you gave them the $5 cert, they gave you the $3.95 back. We ended up throwing a lot of kiddie cones away. Edit. I had no idea when I posted this that it would blow up the way that it did. So here are a few answers to some of the questions that people asked in the comments. 1. We could hit 10 to 12 stores in a day if we drove around for 5 to 6 hours. Both of us would use a gift cert. It wasn't that labor intensive. 2. The only cameras in our store were at the cash registers and the takeout window. Nothing in the back of house. 3. The manager had no clue who took them, or at least he never treated me any differently. 4. Each gift certificate had a generic code on them. Nothing traceable. For example, all the $25 certs were code 756. You could have 1,000 of them, and they'd all have the same code. 5. In store, when we stopped selling the certificates, we were told to keep honoring them because they had been prepaid. They weren't coupons. Someone at some level had plopped down that cash. And 6. Most pressingly, one can only eat so many kids' ice cream cones. When I was 11 years old, I lived in a small apartment with my mom, stepdad, and sister. The apartment building was more of a house that had been split into 3 units rather than a traditional apartment complex. My family and I lived in the top apartment, while 2 families lived in the 2 remaining apartments below. Both families had children, but I made quick friends with the 9 and 10-year-old from the bottom apartment as we were closest in age. I remember going to their apartment to play during the summer, while my mom, who worked nights, slept during the day. We either played outside or we hung out in what could only be described as a hoarder house, watching Olsen twin movies. One thing that stands out in my memory are the stacks and stacks of kids' movies, especially every Olsen twin movie or show to ever exist. I recall the older of the 2 girls, who I regrettably can't recall either of their names, asked if I could spend the night once, and her mother plainly refused. She was actually adamant about it. I recall one day that her dad came home from work and asked me to sit on his lap while he stroked my hair. Shortly after this request, the mom angrily told me to go home. One evening, just before sunset, while the girls and I played outside, the oldest asked me to sit outside her and her sister's bedroom window and just listen after they went inside. She didn't explain to me what I was listening for. She simply asked me to be a witness to whatever happened. So I did. I listened as she begged her father to stop. I listened to her cries. I listened to every second of her pleading until my stepdad called me home for dinner. That night, I sat at the table, 11 years old, and sick in my soul. I sat there frozen, not knowing what I was supposed to do, unable to process what I just heard. My stepdad, after what seemed like an eternity, asked me what was wrong. I don't remember things clearly from that point on. I know I told him what I'd heard. I know we spent the entire night at the police department. I know that man was arrested within the next few days. I watched as he was taken, and as his family wept watching him go. I was never allowed to speak to those girls again, and soon after this, they moved. I can't remember their names like I said, but I remember the name of the man that went to prison for 12 years for the SA of his 2 young daughters. I remember at 12 being subpoenaed to court, though he pleaded guilty and I never had to testify against him. Some years ago, I looked him up on Google, being curious about how much time he served and whether his children's names would be listed. I often think of those girls and hope that they have found healing and happiness. I didn't find that information, but what I found was cathartic in a different sort of way. Sometime after his release from prison, that man was burned alive in his own home by a woman. The article didn't say if she had any relation to him, but I can only imagine what horrific things he may have done to her in order for her to take matters into her own hands. I also can't imagine the people that he hurt after he was released. The world is better off without him in it. But that woman and whoever else she was trying to protect will continue to suffer because of that man. 6 years per kid. It's not enough. It'll never be enough. I hate that that man's name is the only one I can remember, and I'll remember it for the rest of my life.